Welcome to Rugby Rundown. At last, a new series with Jan de Koning. Been working on this for a bit now, for a while. And here we are now. This Rugby Rundown is a bit of a news thing, and we're doing it in collaboration with Jan's own podcast and channel, Rugby Unfiltered, as you can see in the banner back there. And I'm very excited, Jan. Thank you, and welcome back.
Emir, thank you very much for having me again. It's been a while since we chatted. I mean, life evolves, rugby evolves, and but it's
channels evolve. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's great to be back.
Before we continue, just talk to me about Rugby Unfiltered quickly. That's your own podcast that you do with Eugene Eloff every week. How's it going?
Yeah, it's doing well. As you will know, sometimes you miss things, and something that you think is a good idea suddenly doesn't work, and the readers don't want it, and something which you don't think is a good idea or that you don't feel comfortable with, then suddenly flies off the thing. I mean, that's just how life works. So learn as you go, or learn on the job, as they say. But I'm happy. It's nice. It's a good project, and yeah, we'll see where it goes, but I'm just glad that we can continue our collaboration. That's the important part.
Right. I'm going to put the link to your channel in the description down here as well, so people can go link on it. This is also a collaboration with Rugby Unfiltered, so you'll see both channels will be under this video. So if you click on there, you can go to either one of our channels, so have a look there. So thank you, Jan. So the aim of this podcast is basically to talk about what's happening, because nobody's more plugged into rugby than you. And I suppose Hendrik Cronje, but you're pretty much on the same level. So I thought, if I want to know what's going on in rugby, I always ask Jan first. So here we go. So what's news in the world of rugby? I mean, let's look at what happened on Saturday in that derby. Firstly, you've been in rugby for a very, very long time. What do you think happened on Saturday?
Stormers pitched, Bulls didn't pitch.
Oh, thank you. Let's move on then.
I think Johan, you can see the body language. Early in the game, the Bulls were up for it. One or two decisions went against them, and the guy's foot was in touch, or there was a knock on. Whatever you want to say, when a call goes against you, players either lift themselves and stay focused. And even when it was going against the Stormers, when the Bulls were in control, those first 10, 20 minutes, the Stormers didn't drop their heads, but the moment things started going against the Bulls, the players started dropping their heads, the intensity slacked off, and the Stormers took control. For the next 60 minutes, it was all Stormers, and it's simply because while the Bulls might have pitched initially, they just dropped the intensity far too quickly after a couple of calls went against them, and the end result was a comprehensive win for the Stormers, yet again.
That's an interesting thing, because why do players and why do teams drop their heads? And I want to talk to you about leadership here on the field. Be able to adjust. Ruan Nel being back for the Stormers, to me, was a huge thing. And I'm concerned about the Bulls that was allowed to happen, that they were allowed to drop their heads. They didn't adjust to what the Stormers were bringing, because they didn't expect the way the Stormers were playing. They were surprised by it. And I talked about the referee just now, but talk to me about the leadership of the Bulls.
I think it's not a lack of leadership. It's a confusion around leadership. You got two very strong voices around Marcel and Ruan. And when Ruan wasn't there, Marcel was in control. He was driving the ship. Ruan is back, and we all know he's actually the club captain. So what happens is that maybe there's consenting voices, or there's disagreement, not in a bad way, but players have different opinions. Ruan might say, no, I think we just got to go for a touchline, and Marcel say, no, let's take a scrum. Simple things like that, and very quickly the players will pick up. And I think that's the problem with the Bulls. Not that they don't have the leadership, they don't have a clear leader, and the rest are supporters. And I think Marcel has proven himself as a player and as a leader, so there's no question about that. Ruan is the newcomer, the new kid on the block, so to speak, an established leader. But unfortunately, I think for me, Ruan is the guy that, in this case, not as he's deliberately causing confusion, but his voice is adding to the confusion in the team. And I think that's a problem for Coach Johan Ackermann to resolve. I know Rassie did it with Eben and Dwayne Vermeulen in the World Cup. Put the two of them in a room and say, listen, sort your stuff out and come back with a plan for me. And that's the way you resolve that. I think that's the big problem. And this is a massive, it's only a big Bulls team. They can still go a long way if they get that sorted out.
That's an interesting thing. You just mentioned Ruan is the club captain. And last year, we often saw games where Ruan and Marcel were the co-captains, but not this year. This year, Marcel has been made the captain specifically. So is Ruan still the club captain? And why does he have such a voice then? Isn't there a clear hierarchy, or is there a bit of confusion, do you think?
I think that's the point, is there's this confusion around, has this been made clear in the team and on the field? And Johan Ackerman is welcome to correct me anytime he likes. I'm happy for him to correct me. But on the field, it gives the appearance that there's no clear captaincy. There's almost too many chiefs, a case of too many chiefs. In this case, two is more than enough. Two is too many already, is one too many.
The other question I wanted to ask you was, this derby has been blown up, actually, I think, beyond proportion almost. It's so big. I mean, the Stormers have won 5 out of 6 games at Loftus in the URC against the Bulls. Sort of, they have the Bulls' number. Do you not think they're putting too much pressure on the players with how big they make this derby to be? Because it's the one game of the year where you're basically guaranteed of a sellout almost of the Loftus crowd, which didn't happen on this past Saturday because of schools rugby and the time of the game. It was inevitable. I know they had to postpone the game. But the point is, don't you think they're making too much of this game and they're putting too much pressure rather than just saying, it's just another game. It could be the Dragons or the Stormers. It doesn't matter. You prepare like you normally do. Forget about the occasion, because I think the occasion maybe gets to the players a little bit. Don't you think? Is that a valid argument?
It's a fact of life. The North-South derby is a massive game. It was like that in our days when we were children and we were going to the stadiums in our school clothes and our uniforms to get free entry. And it's still like that. Northern Transvaal against Western Province. Bulls against the Stormers. It's a massive game. They can play it on the moon. You'll probably still find 30,000 people going there. And I'm aware that Saturday there was challenges. First of all, the rain was an issue. The kickoff 2 o'clock people don't like that. They want a 3 o'clock or a 5 o'clock kickoff. You got to give them a bit of time to have lunch with a couple of brandies. And you also have to make sure there's not an office Waterkloof match nearby. It's like having a Boerland rugby match in Wellington and then having the 2 Paul schools playing against each other. Nobody's going to turn up and everybody's going to turn up in Paul. And I think there probably would have been as many people at the Cliffies office game as there were at Loftus.
Yeah, I mean, that was inevitable. They said it as well because they had to postpone the game and they couldn't choose the kickoff time. And they had to fit in with the rest of the schedules, the Six Nations, I suppose, and everything else. But that's just one of the things. I'm glad they didn't play that in December because then they wouldn't have had this nice game to look forward to. But let's talk about the game itself. When the Stormers picked those 2 wings, one of our friends said to me, MV, they're going to kick. They're going to be kicking and kicking and kicking. Do you think the Bulls were caught out by the Stormers' game plan a bit?
They may have been surprised. They may have expected the Stormers to run. But I can let you in a little secret. I went to training last Wednesday, and you're not allowed to record. And obviously, as it is, you're not expected to leak whatever you want to do to share your information. You interview the player that's available, and that's as far as you go. And I think it's ethical. That's the right way to do it. But you could clearly see the way they practice, and you could hear them in the instructions in the background. You had Ruan and people on the side. As soon as you get a thing, they would shout at Sasha, that one long, that one high. So the instruction was clear there that they were going to kick a lot on the Bulls. And they were testing the Bulls in the air, and they won that battle. So maybe that's a weakness for the Bulls to work on.
Yeah, no, we saw that coming. All right, let's talk about Sasha. You mentioned him. Played a little bit differently, a little bit more in his shell. And I like that. I mean, it shows you that he can. What I didn't like was his attitude that he was actually berated by the referee for. And he apologized afterwards. And Jan-Hendrik Wessels did exactly the same, to be fair, yeah. Chirped a bit at the referee. That's a thing that I don't like. That's sticking out his head, people go gunning for the ref on the field. That's not acceptable, is it?
That's definitely a soccer thing creeping into our game. It is a two-edged sword, Emir. We always want players to have character. So we all say we don't want these sanitized, straight up and down cliched players, you know. So we want them to show character, but they still got a ethos of the game. And I think that's a fine balance. And one or two players might go over the edge, or might go a bit too far. In this case, if it's the same player does the same thing over and over, and I'm not taking a knock at any specific player here. Some players are doing a bit too often, and maybe they should rein themselves in a bit. Show your character, show your passion, but be careful what you do, and that's a problem. So the Bulls' discipline were definitely a problem as well on Saturday, and I'm not talking about the yellow cards, because both teams had 2 yellow cards. I'm talking about the number of penalties. 15 penalties in a game like that is far too high. So 15 penalties against 7 penalties tells me clearly that the Bulls were giving too many. The discipline, and I'm not. We're not talking foul play or stuff. Just they weren't concentrating, and it was silly penalties, avoidable penalties.
All right. Now I'm going to ask you a little bit more controversial question. The referee, Marius van der Westhuizen. When it was announced last week that he was going to be the referee for this game, I heard lots of groans going up in Pretoria. I heard it in my house here, and I'm miles away from Loftus at the moment. It seems to be a bit of a thing about Marius van der Westhuizen and these derbies. Any truth to that? Any substance to it? Or is it just, the Bulls hyperventilating for nothing and trying to find an excuse?
Yeah, there is a perception, and this is a real perception, not just now. It's been for a while, that Marius gets too many Stormers games, and calls seem to go the Stormers' way. Now, that might not be a real thing. That might just be a perception, an incorrect perception. The fact of the matter is that Marius does get a lot of Stormers game, and maybe it just allows the Stormers to know exactly how he referees and adjust. So that might also play into their tactics. They know that Marius blows like this at the breakdown, so just don't get into the breakdown. Just kick the ball back to the Bulls and let them make the mistakes at the breakdown. So that's the issue is do you adjust to Marius or do you moan all the time? The really good teams will just adjust and shut up. So don't let your frustration. It goes back to your points from earlier. Players like Jan Hendrik and Sasha shouldn't complain to the referee. They can show their passion, but they should not complain to the referee about calls. Whatever you feel, whatever your frustration, just accept it and move on. You get paid to do the job, and somebody will assess Marius, and somewhere somebody will come up and tell him, no, listen, that's... And I'm sure his review process would have shown up a few errors, and end of the day, the Bulls were just not good enough. When the Bulls they shouldn't go and look at Marius. They shouldn't even look at any of the calls. What they should go to look at is their own play, their own performance, and the body language of some players.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think it's more a perception amongst the supporters than the Bulls themselves. I mean, if the Stormers can figure out how he blows, the Bulls can do pretty much the same. There's no reason for them not to. The point was that they did concede more penalties than they should have. Worryingly, they conceded a lot of penalties in the scrums. That's a big concern for me. And I'm also concerned about why that Springbok front row was replaced so quickly, fairly early. And I know the thinking is to get Morne Smith to sort of ease into the role, but I'm worried about the Bulls' depth at tight end. Morne Smith and Francois Klopper, in the absence of Wilco Louw, I don't know, there seems to be a bit of a problem there.
Yeah, I think the problem with the Bulls is they need to find another front row urgently, because we know that Wilco is leaving. And the depth behind him is not that good. So that's a definite aspect for the Bulls to work on. As to Saturday, that puzzles me still. Johan Ackerman did try and explain it post-match. I'm not sure I agree with what he said, but that's his view. He's the coach. It's his call to make. So, yeah, I would have done... The Stormers worked out how Marius was refereeing the scrums. They got blown in the first couple of scrums. They worked out what was going on. And they sorted it out on the field. So midway through the first half, the Stormers started taking control of the scrums. Why? because they adjusted. The Bulls, what did they do? They kept doing the same stuff and they got penalized. So that's the big problem for me. And it goes back to what we said about the discipline, everything else. The Stormers adjusted, the Bulls didn't adjust, and the heads dropped. And that's why they lost.
It's a good point. We talked about breakdown earlier, Deon Fourie and Paul de Villiers. Deon Fourie is just a typical, when he plays against the Bulls, he just lifts his game a little bit, that extra bit of niggle. He's always a pain in the backside, someone said in our comments. The moment he was selected, they knew we were in for a long day at the office, and it proved to be so. Not maybe poaching so many balls, but slowing things down. That tsunami of offloads from the Bulls that we saw against the Lions and the Sharks, it wasn't allowed to happen on Saturday. The Stormers worked that out. And, the breakdown and the speed of the rucks, a major factor in what we saw on Saturday.
Yes, again, Deon is coming, so what do? You adjust. Teams have a habit of, in the good teams you will find, if they know there's a player like Deon or Paul de Villiers in the opposition team, what do? They run at him so that he has to tackle, and then the poacher is out of the game. So that's a mistake. The Bulls carried on with the same tactic and allowed Deon to roam behind the tackle line of defense and then come in when he's ready, Like you say, he didn't poach many balls, but he definitely did a heck of a job slowing them down. So I agree with you. The whole scene. We're going to every aspect of this game. We're going to do the same thing. You're going to find the Bulls didn't adjust in the lineouts. They didn't adjust at the breakdown. They didn't adjust in the scrums. They didn't adjust on defense. And the scoreboard tells the story.
Well, that's the thing. That's what we talked about leadership in the beginning. Why didn't they adjust? Any good leader would say, right, let's stop this. Let's just think about this for 30 seconds. And see what we can do. And like you said, I said it yesterday in another podcast, the definition of stupidity is trying to do the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. That's a classic definition. And that's pretty much what we saw on Saturday. I'm not calling them stupid. I'm just saying that they didn't adjust. That's what I'm trying to get at. And talking about not adjusting, how much do you think the Bulls struggled without Ambrose Papier there? And it was short notice, 7 o'clock that Saturday morning, we got the SMS or the WhatsApp from the Bulls saying that Ambrose is out of the game, and Paul de Wet is going to start, Zach Burger on the bench. I mean, they do also kinds of scenario planning, everything, but I'm sure a player of the caliber of Ambrose Papier must have been a huge setback.
It's his form. The current form is under. I think that, and a lot of the planning around the Bulls would have gone into what he can do, how he can kick. And I think Paul de Wet's a good player, but I don't think his kicking game and his passing game is on Ambrose's level. And Ambrose's reading of the game. So Paul de Wet's more a structured type player, if I may say so. And I'm not berating him. He's a good player. But Ambrose is asked different questions. And I think that's what they missed. And especially on such a short notice. If you practice something the whole week and suddenly now another player is there. Now that player must play that game plan, and that game plan doesn't work. A few kicks at up and unders that go too deep, or a few up and unders that doesn't go deep enough or don't go deep enough. So that's the problem, and that's what that creates, especially if it's such a late stage. But we understand, Ambrose's wife had a baby, and yeah.
You can't expect him to go play at Loftus when his baby's being born, I suppose. Yeah, no, I get it. I agree with you. All right, let's talk about number 10. Big problems brewing at the Bulls at number 10. I'm not talking about Andre not being in form or anything. I'm saying there's no depth there. Liam Koen is left for the Griquas. I heard JT Kerplank is now at the Lions. Chris Smith wanted to come back, but Jake, just before he left, vetoed his comeback, from what I know. Sticking with Jaco van der Walt for a bit, which he shouldn't have maybe. The Bulls' pantry is a bit empty. Then Tinus de Beer was, from the sounds of it, signed and done and dusted, and then it leaked in the press, and that sort of scuppered that deal. Now we're hearing Curvin Bosch, and I tell you what, the Loftus faithful are up in arms saying that they're going to start supporting the Lions and everything if the Bulls sign Curvin Bosch. I think it might be a bit of an overreaction. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it puzzles me because Curvin Bosch left the Sharks under a cloud. His form dipped so badly that he left, and they let him go. Okay, he only played Springboks twice, way back. Somebody said, I read yesterday in one of the articles I did, that Curvin Bosch was made a Springbok in the dark ages of South African rugby. And by that they mean the time when South African rugby was really bad, 2016, 2017, thereabouts. So the problem is, I haven't seen anything of Curvin Bosch in the Pro D2. So I don't know what sort of form he's got. People say, yeah, the Pro D2, you must be able to tackle. Kerwin Bosch could never tackle. They always had to hide him at fullback or on the wing somewhere and have a flank or somebody else or a center tackling in that channel on defense. So that's a problem already. I don't know if he's learned to tackle. And given that he's only played about half the games he's been there, so he's only played about 50%. I think he's played 25 out of 50 games or something, or 23 out of 50 games. That means he's not a regular player, a regular feature in the matchday squad. So he's probably playing in the lesser games, against the lesser teams, and that's so we don't know. We have no idea what his form is. So that's puzzling for me. The Bulls are, maybe it's just desperate because they're struggling. Pollard is struggling to regain his form, and I think the problem is also what has he got on his inside, what has he got on his outside. Pollard understands what he has at the Springboks. It's different players, and his pack at the Springboks are different to the one at the Bulls. So, yeah, and then below Pollard, you've got Keegan. Who's actually a scrum off or fly off. He was a fly off at school. Fly off comes scrum off, or vice versa. So there is a need for another specialist fly off. But Kerwin Bosch played in the latter stages of his Sharks career, played more at fullback than anything else. And both his games for the Springboks were one he started at fullback, and the other one he came off the bench as a fullback. So he hasn't got a good track record at fly off, even though he's got a massive kicking game. He can boot the ball a mile, but unfortunately he's not consistent enough, and that's the problem the Bulls are going to struggle with. If you get another pack like the Storms, you play a Leinster or you play a Glasgow, which can match the Bulls' physicality up front, then Kerwin Bosch is no good to you.
Yeah, the Kerwin Bosch we knew at the Sharks, but I mean, a telling thing for me was Johan van Graan is apparently trying to sign Kerwin Bosch for Bath. I mean, Johan van Graan is no Palooka. He knows what he's up to, and he must have seen something there, maybe in the Pro D2. Maybe he had a chance to reset, take away the spotlight, just find himself again. There must be something to it.
Oh, absolutely. You're correct in one thing, is Johan is no Palooka. He knows exactly what he's doing. So that's why I say I haven't seen anything of Kerwin Bosch. I can only judge on what I've seen before. So if he has learned to tackle it in the Pro D2, if he has learned to be calm and a more controlled fly off, instead of just hoofing the ball a million miles down the field, then maybe, yeah, that's it. And France, those are the games. You have to learn that because you're also playing in very different conditions, It's not a humid, muggy Durban or a dry Loftus. It's a very different environment. So, yeah, maybe Kerwin Bosch is 28, so maybe he's matured, and maybe now's a good time to look at him again, and maybe he offers something at this level. So, yeah, I will reserve judgment until I've seen him play.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I know, through the grapevine, the Bulls are very, very adamant maybe in trying to get Yuri Mathieu to sign for them. But he's decided to stay with the Stormers. And I'm surprised to hear that, basically, because at the Stormers, he'll always play second fiddle, I suppose, to Sasha. Whereas at the Bulls, maybe, Andre, maybe he would have played second fiddle to Andre a little bit. I don't know. But I mean, he would have been more prominent, I would have thought, at the Bulls. I know he got married recently and everything else, but why do you think he decided not? I mean, yeah, he grew up in province and everything else. I suppose that's part of it. But I'm surprised to say no to such a high-profile position like at the Bulls.
Yeah, it depends what he's getting at the Stormers and the lifestyle. So, some players will stay at the Bulls for life because that's their culture. We all know Pretoria and Cape Town is like chalk and cheese. It's Mars and Venus and Mars. So I think maybe it's just a culture thing, and there are some players that just thrives in the Cape Town culture, the environment, and some players need Pretoria. So, some players enjoy red wine, some players enjoy brandy. That's just life. So I think that could be the only reason. I'm sure it's not lack of money.
Yeah, no, it's not lack of money. I'm sure. Dylan Mart is a good example. I just want to say, I'm going to put it on record here that the rumors that Dylan Mart was offered double what the Stormers offered him is not true. I can categorically state that. I know that it's not true. Anyway, but I'm glad to hear the Bulls actually signed him up because we're going to miss Gertly Arlen, so make no mistake. We saw him again on Saturday, what he's capable of, but he also seems to me to be a bit of a diminished player. I'm not sure. He doesn't have that zing to him anymore. Something is a little bit off. Did you notice that?
Yeah, it's almost as if he's lost pace, but he hasn't lost pace. I mean, but yeah, maybe the enthusiasm was taken out of him. I mean, you spoke about other players that weren't happy under a previous regime, and maybe that's that enthusiasm, that love and passion's not there for Pretoria anymore, and that's it. Then it's time to move on. If somebody is not giving his all in an environment, and you suspect that something is off, then rather let him go and find somebody who's willing to play at that level. There's lots of good players. They're not all at the same standard, but I'm sure they're not that far behind. So, yeah, if he's not happy in that environment, let him go somewhere else.
Let's talk about the Stormers a little bit. We've talked about the Bulls a lot now, but the Stormers, after a run of 3 losses, lots of penalties conceded in those games, sort of seem to have lost their direction a little bit. And to make this kind of a comeback in such an important game says something about the team and the culture and the coaching and everything else. What do you think changed there? How did they manage to turn this ship around?
Have they turned it around?
Good question.
I know they're playing the Dragons on Sunday, so it'll probably be another easy win for them. But I want to take you back to the previous Bulls Stormers game in Cape Town. After the game, John Dobson made it clear that level of intensity and physicality cannot be sustained. And lo and behold, his team dropped off. The intensity dropped off, the physicality dropped off, and they went into 3 losses. It was actually 4 because one was in Europe. 4 losses in a row. The intensity completely dropped off. The next game that they lift themselves up for is the Bulls at Loftus. It was to be expected. And we spoke about the derby and what makes it. It's always going to be intensity. It's going to be almost a test match level. And John Dobson crowed a lot about how great he is and what a great game it was, and rightfully so. It was test match level. Its intensity. It was 2 very good teams going at each other in a hell of a physical battle. So now the question is, can the Stormers maintain this? They've got a tough run in towards the end of the season where they've got to go on the road, where the Bulls have got a lot of home games now. The Stormers has got a lot of games in Europe or away from home. So the question is, can they maintain this intensity, and how long can they maintain it for? So this week there's a bit of a let-off because I don't know how many players the Dragons getting back. They might not get too many of their Welsh players back. But the reality is that the Stormers need to maintain this physicality for the next 6 weeks. And can they do that? Given what happened after the last Bulls game, I have to wonder if we're not going to see another dip soon.
Well, one of the problems that John Dobson identified is the fact that they didn't have enough depth, specifically in the pack. If the intensity gets maintained, you're going to have injuries, more injuries, and then you're going to, fall back on already out of locks here. We saw this weekend on the bench, no locks on the bench, 2 centers and 2 flankers. So that was interesting. Is depth a problem at the Stormers?
Depth at that level, yes. So their match day 23 is good. Their starting 15 is great, as we saw. I mean, they won't win. You got the bench calls right. We spoke earlier about the Bulls subbing at the wrong time. Why did they sub? Was it the right call to make? The Stormers made all the right calls. So I think their match day squad is fine, but injuries will cause a problem. So yeah, there is definitely an issue of depth and quality depth. You can find another 40 players. There's lots of clubs and universities and stuff. So you can find another 40 players, but are they up for this level of URC performance? That's the question. And I think that's where the problem lies. The Bulls have a similar problem because the Bulls bench is not what it used to be. The Bulls need to find another front row very quickly, a quality front row very quickly, because the scrums were a mess when they took the Wilco and them off. So I think there's a problem.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, the interesting thing is the Bulls managed to hold on to Kobus Wiese, but I was thinking about it on Saturday that this is the last derby that Wilke Louw will be playing for the Bulls. Next year he's playing for the Stormers. And as a staunch Bulls supporter, that doesn't sit nicely with me. But anyway, I wanted to ask your opinion. You and I are both two old men, and suppose a bit set in our ways. We talked about players showing some character and some attitude and everything else. What's your opinion on, and I'm digressing a little bit, your opinion on Henry Pollock's antics?
Yeah, I think he's over the top. I think he's bought into the hype, and he's, this whole thing about, going around and having the blonde hair with a hairband, that's why Dwayne Vermeulen said at that Springbok press conference, he would love to make a comeback just for 10 minutes just against this guy. He knows that he's not fit enough, but I think that 10 minutes will see Dwayne Vermeulen running all after Pollock, and Pollock will disappear out of the game very quickly. So, yeah, you see a lot of him, but you only see him, you don't see him do much in the game. Here and there you see him break or run with the ball, or but you don't see him doing a lot of constructive things. And the problem is going to come now. It might be fine. In these games, it will be, it's the Six Nations, and, France team is a bit off color, and, he looks fine. But come the World Cup, and you've got quarterfinals, semifinals, and the final, and you're going to play, and we all know that goes up another level anyway from normal test rugby. So, is he the type of player that can win you a World Cup? He might win you a few matches. He might have a few moments, and he's a great player. Make no mistake. But I just think, to me, I think first do the game, do the basics right. So I'd much rather have a Dwayne Vermeulen than a Henry Pollock.
Yeah. I'm interested. What did Dwayne mean by that? Did he expand on it, or did he just talk about the 10 minutes?
You actually need to see his face in a clip where he said, he actually said, I would like to make a comeback, but I know I'll only last 10 minutes.
That's all I need.
That's all I need. So he wants to put the little young man in his place, just cut him down a peg or two. And Dwayne's been around the block. I mean, he's played against some monsters in his life.
He's a hard man. If that guy comes running up to me, I will run the other way as fast as I possibly can. I'll tell you what. Right, I wanted to ask you in closing, Six Nations, you've been following it closely. I know you have. We had a podcast with our English correspondent in England, a supporter of Wales, but he's of the opinion that the Springboks will easily beat any of these teams in the Six Nations by at least 15 to 20 points. From what you've seen in the Six Nations, people are now saying it's the best Six Nations ever and blah, 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 blah. Thoughts on that?
The best Six Nations ever. Go read the defense stats, and then you come speak to me again. Defense is now optional. So what are we trying to turn rugby into? Touch rugby. So, yeah, to me, it's not real test rugby. In the world, again, I'll take you back, same as the Pollock argument. In the World Cup, quarterfinal, semi-final, or final, what rugby is you going to play? Are you going to not try and score 100 tries and not worry about defense? And suddenly you can't score tries because the opposition is much closer, much faster, much more alert. And now your attack is not working. So what do you do? And that's where the problem is. So I think in general, the Six Nations was very exciting. I loved it. I watched that England game right to the end. In particular, I enjoyed the last call, whether it was the right call or not. Who cares? It was a fun call because that put a cherry on top of what was a very entertaining Six Nations, the greatest ever. No, I think just go check. Anybody can do that. Go to the Six Nations website and go check the defense stats, and you'll see where the team's defense percentage sits, and then you understand why there were so many tries.
And the fact that you Griffin thinks that the Springboks would beat these teams by 15 to 20 points, is that a valid argument? Are the Springboks that far ahead of them still?
I think that's a bit of an overestimation. The Springboks should win. We're playing England at Ellis Park, so I think depending on what type of team England sends, they're going to have a few issues at Ellis Park. And obviously, Russia is going to target that game because he wants to get off on a high. So I think our biggest challenge will be Scotland, because Scotland plays the type of game that can trouble us. When Scotland's on the day, they can trouble us. So, and then our big game at the year end would be France again. And I think France is going to come for us again. You know, the last year we were quite comfortable in beating Ireland and France. And I think if we get past England and Scotland, and then we got a chance of doing really well in the Champions Cup. So, but I personally, I know I might be way off the mark here, but personally, I think our biggest challenge in the Champions Cup is Scotland. Certainly in July.
The Nations Cup, yeah. Not the Champions Cup.
Sorry.
Before we get corrected by everyone in the comments. No, I agree with you. And England's got their work cut out with them. Just in closing, they play that game at Ellis Park. The next week they have to play Fiji in England, and then the next weekend they have to play Argentina in Argentina. I mean, okay, they're going to probably leave a B team behind to play Fiji, but still, the traveling is going to get to them. I mean, when we go to Europe, we basically just have short-haul flights between all those games. We don't have to do what the northern teams have to do when they come to the south, don't you think? It's a bit of a... I mean, I'm a Southern Hemisphere supporter, but that seems to me a little unfair.
Let them have some.
Yeah, I agree.
We've been traveling for some time, so let them have some. But the reality is, those long-haul flights, do you send the B team to Fiji and send another team to go prepare in Argentina? That's probably the way to do it. I think Argentina is going to be the tougher challenge in any event. And I think England's B team, I think the bigger question for me is, can Steve Borthwick find something other than kick and chase? Yeah,
can Steve Borthwick keep his job, do you think?
That's also the problem. So the reality is that England's now become so predictable because they've got these guys that are good in the air. They're overdoing the. So if you can counter that aerial game of theirs, they've got nothing else. So they're just too predictable. And I think, and Tony Brown said it in that Springbok press conference as well. He says the Springboks now have different ways of beating you. If they can't beat you in the scrum, they can beat you at the ruck or the lineouts, or maybe at the turnover or the counter attack, or maybe the kick game works today. But the Springboks have the ability to adjust in the game, which brings us back to what we said earlier. In the game, when things don't work for you, try and find something that works for you. And that's exactly what, and again, Steve Borthwick's game, the one he used in the semi-final in the World Cup, the Springboks found a way. By halftime, they realized, hold on a second, we're getting beaten here with this kick and chase game in a wet Paris. So let's change something. And they did. And it worked. I mean, okay, at one point, and the fact of the day, whether you win by 1 point or by 100 points, you still win a game.
I agree. Sorry, Jan, one last question that popped in my head now when you were talking those press conferences with Tony Brown and the likes. What did he think about Dave Rennie being appointed as the All Black coach now? What can we expect from the All Blacks?
A very different All Blacks team, a lot less predictable, and they'll return to traditional New Zealand rugby, so they will be a bit more expansive. I don't think Razor coped very well with, there's one thing being in Canterbury and having the same type of player all the time. So it's the same thing you have at Pretoria with Loftus and Cape Town with the Stormers. Certain players fit in certain environments and they do very well. Suddenly, that whole Canterbury culture, you can't just plant that onto and he took his coaches with him, his Canterbury or Crusaders coaches for lack of a bit, but it's still a Canterbury province. So all that whole culture didn't fit the All Blacks. And there was, and as much as they would like to deny it, there was definitely culture problems and differences between the players and the coaches. And there was a breakdown of communication. And it wasn't workable. And I think Rennie will definitely do it.
Okay, Jan, I keep saying in closing, but there's so many things I want to talk to you about. The most important thing is the Blitzbokke, winning the championship or the series, whatever it's called nowadays. But you talked to me before we start recording. That's not the end of it. There's more to come. Talk to me about that.
Okay, so the whole Sevens landscape has been revamped. So now there was just 6 World Series tournaments, and the league winner, the Blitzboks won the league. So the previous year, they by the 8th, they barely sneaked into the top 8, and went to the championship, and they won the championship in America. That was a one-off tournament. So the person who won that tournament was called the World Champions. So the World Cup of Sevens, and the Springboks won that. But they barely sneaked into qualifying. They sneaked in at number 8 because they didn't have a good league season. This year, they did very well. They won the league. So now they've won the World Series. They won the league stage. But to retain their title, to defend their title, they're now going to go to a 3-test. And it's not a one-off tournament anymore. It's now also been made a 3-tournament series. So there's another series of tournaments coming on. And those tournaments are in Hong Kong next month in April. Then Valladolid, I hope I pronounced it correct, Valladolid in Spain. That's in May. And then Bordeaux in France in June. Those 3 tournaments will then determine the world champions. So to do the double and defend their world championship title, the Blitzboks now going to go play in 3 more tournaments. But the top 8 teams from the World Series will go play in the World. And then there's a whole bunch of qualifying tournaments for other guys to try and get into the World Series proper. So, but those 3 tournaments is going to determine the world champions, the Sevens world champions, which is the current holders of the Blitzboks.
Okay, they took the E's out of Sevens, so now it's just Z's. But they made the name less complicated, but they made the tournament more complicated. I mean, why is it so? Is it only for this year, or is it now forever going to be like this? What's the story?
I think World Rugby is having a problem finding a format that's working. Because Sevens was a very uncomplicated. You played 8 or 12 tournaments, and the winner was the winner. Klaar, finish. If you won enough tournaments, or you finished well enough in certain tournaments, the Blitzbok won a couple of times, New Zealand won a couple of times. Fiji. So I think also financially that's definitely a challenge. So to have so many tournaments around the world and not get enough eyeballs on, and you've seen it in some of the tournaments around the world in this World Series, you just see empty stadiums, and I think that's part of the problem. Is it's not attractive anymore. And I went to the Cape Town Sevens, and I wouldn't say I was disgusted, but I was very disappointed. The rugby was a sideshow. Yeah. And they try to attract a new audience, and I understand that. But, if you want to attract a new audience, go have a bunch of bands playing at rugby stadiums and attract a new audience. But to say it's a Sevens tournament and the actual rugby is a sideshow, and it's all about parties around it. I mean, at one stage we walked around that concourse on the outside of the Cape Town Stadium. And, then you've got a rapper here, and 50 meters further, you've got a Soki, and then you've got another band who's, and some of these guys, they might be well known in the local communities, but I've never heard of them. And to be frank with you, it was irritatingly poor, the quality of some of the stuff. Some oak just, like Jack Parrott, just, if you just swear and call it music, that's not my scene, Rhythmic swearing is not music, So, yeah, the entire concept of attracting a new audience and making the party around the game, everybody wants to replicate the Hong Kong success. Hong Kong has been declining for a few years. You'll see now when they play in Hong Kong next month. I don't think you're going to have that stadium packed as it used to be, because Hong Kong was known as the party venue. And the people went there and they partied all the time, and the Sevens were good. But now, to try and replicate that and the rugby actually becomes a sideshow, that's a problem for me.
I don't understand why they're making it more complicated. I mean, you and I do rugby almost for a living. You've been doing it for many, many years, and it's complicated for us to understand. How complicated it must be for normal supporters and fans to understand. I didn't even know what you were telling me about just now. I mean, this is unnecessary. I think they're killing that game, specifically the Sevens.
Yeah, they're losing traction, and it's pretty clear they're losing traction. And I suspect there might be another format revamp after this season.
All right, Jan, thank you for that. It was our first rugby rundown. I enjoyed it, as I thought I would, and I did. Because it's such a pleasure talking to you, man. Thank you for making time for us.
It's a pleasure, man.